Welcome to the Zelda Informer podcast, your favorite place for Zelda stuff. I'm your host, Full Metal Alfie, joined today by Spiteri. Did I pronounce that right?
You did, yeah.
Yeah, Andy Spiteri is one of our writers. Nate couldn't be here today due to some other stuff, so luckily we've got somebody that's willing to help us out. I'm trying some new things with the podcast, trying to change it up from its typical format. Kind of like more of a focus on Zelda stuff as opposed to just, the Switch or whatever, but also more focused on some stuff in the Zelda community. There's a lot of stuff I want to do, and there's a lot of stuff I have planned that I'll be putting into practice soon. So I want to know what you guys think. Feel free to leave comments like you always do, debating me about evolution like you were last time, or just preferably talk about what you liked and didn't like about the podcast this week, and things that you'd like to stay, things that you'd like to change, or things that you like to see. Because right now I'm just experimenting with it, and I want to see what you guys want. Because without you, there's no podcast. So, that being said, the first change is, while we are going to cover news, we're only going to cover specific talking points of news, things that can create good discussion between me and whoever else is on here. So one of the things that we learned, based on an interview with Aonuma, was that the game Breath of the Wild takes place after Ocarina of Time. So we know that it's not, a fourth timeline split before or right after Skyward Sword before Ocarina of Time. But we also don't know where after Ocarina of Time because there are three separate timelines. Now, there's a theory by Game Over Jesse that talks about this being at the Downfall timeline for multiple reasons, and then I'll give you some information on that too. So he talks about how in the Downfall timeline, what could have happened was Link was rescued right before the final strike of Ganon by the sages. In being rescued and being taken away, no one was there to stop Ganon, but he's rather sealed at Hyrule Castle. Staying in his beast form, though, since his physical body had been destroyed, Ganondorf was gone. He eventually evolved into a being of pure evil. And this kind of goes in what we've seen with the different videos of Ganon just being kind of energy, and kind of devolving into that. That also fits in with another thing that we heard and that we read, was that there's a specific dungeon with the boss being named Windblight Ganon. It's a huge monster that has no face and a gun-like arm. Doesn't look like Ganon. Doesn't look like Ganondorf. That lends itself to this theory that Ganon is just more of an entity as opposed to a person. And so there are different ways that we could talk about this, but I kind of want to hear what your thoughts are on this before we go any further. Just so this is a discussion more than me just talking at you.
Yeah, sure. I was always, once I heard it, I was kind of a fan of the merging the timeline theory. I think if it's not the case, then the Fallen Hero timeline probably makes the most sense, because and correct me if I'm wrong, that's when Ganon is in his beast form, right? So definitely Calamity Ganon looks like more of a urethral kind of enemy that can kind of take form at will. So it would make sense to see the beast form evolve into something else, especially if he's ruled, unchecked for the last 100 years at least.
Mm-hmm. Well, that would make sense. Like, I'd agree that, it fits the Downfall timeline specifically because from what we know, Ganon is more along the lines of just the manifestation of the Curse of Demise. Mm-hmm. So while he does take a physical form, it's more of a curse. It's more of like you said, an ethereal being that's kind of transcendent. So it would make sense that he, though contained by either the sages or the Sheikah, is more of a being of energy now.
Well, it almost makes sense too, because at the end of Twilight Princess, when you strike Ganon down, his Triforce disappears, and that seems to kind of be the end of it. So I mean, maybe maybe it's left Ganondorf himself and just became this Calamity Ganon. Maybe. Yeah.
I mean, what we do know though is that there is no, as far as we know, there's no Ganondorf. That this is purely Ganon, which is something we don't see until I think it's the Downfall timeline, with being mostly Ganon, because then we see at the end of, I might be completely wrong on this, and let me look up the timeline before I completely speak out of my butt here, but
I'm gonna say too. My big area of expertise definitely is in the timeline. So anyone listening to this, feel free to correct me.
yeah. So at the Downfall timeline, yeah, I was right. So you've got A Link to the Past, Oracles, Link's Awakening, Legend of Zelda, and Adventure of Link. And in all those games where Ganon appears, he's Ganon. He's not Ganondorf. So in A Link to the Past, you fight Ganon. Same thing in Oracle of Seasons, End of Ages. Well, if you played both of them and combined them, then you fight Ganon. Link's Awakening, not so much. But in the Legend of Zelda, the original one, you see Ganon revived again. And then finally in the Adventure of Link, you see Ganon's revival prevented. But throughout that whole thing, it's Ganon and not Ganondorf.
Right.
Where you see Ganondorf is in the hero successful timeline, which is with Twilight Princess, and then obviously the Hero of Wind timeline with Wind Waker. But like we said, in this game it fits that he's part of the Downfall timeline. Mm-hmm. We don't know how. So where do you think it would fall in that area? Do you think it'd be the last game, or do you think it would be more along the lines of somewhere in the middle?
Well, before I get to that, I actually just had an observation. It's ironic that Ganondorf isn't in the Heroes Defeated timeline, because if anything, you think if Ganondorf was successful, he would be in that timeline causing havoc. So I never really noticed that until right now. Mm-hmm. If it is in the Heroes Defeated timeline, I would think that it makes sense to place it somewhat towards the end. I mean, obviously we need to know a little bit more about the story of Breath of the Wild before we definitively place it. But everything in the game seems to be in ruins, so everything has existed for a long time. So to me, that just says that, there are some monuments that have been visited in previous Zelda titles. So if it's going to be there, it's going to be last.
Yeah, and the interesting thing on that, I'll bring this up later as well, in terms of this theory, because this podcast right now is mostly going to be about theories and different theories that we've got around Breath of the Wild. So we're going to have a little fun with that. May not be your cup of tea, but just give it a listen. So I think it was it was HMK and Zelda Master. They're doing a 2-part theory thing about the end of the cycle, and we'll get to that a little later. But in that, HMK mentions that the Zelda series has always had kind of a butterfly effect, and not necessarily in the choices you make, but in the fact that despite there being obvious differences, each game or each timeline has very similar places and very similar locations, whether they look completely different or look very much the same. For example, in Twilight Princess, you have Kakariko Village, and you have the Gerudo Valley, you have Gerudo Desert, you have all those different
similar monuments and stuff like that.
Yeah. And you have like the Sacred Grove, which is Kokiri Forest, which you also see in A Link to the Past, although it's not necessarily called that. It's a similar place. And so like we talked about last week, time happens a specific way. There might be deviations in each of these timelines, but like monuments, like you said, are going to be repeated. So that was an interesting thing to note. So yeah, I'd agree that it could be at the very end, after he's prevented from being revived, but it could also be right before that entire timeline starts. Because on the game, or on the game list with all the timelines on it, it's called the Sealing War, which happens right between Link to the Past. Mm-hmm. And so we haven't seen that and we haven't heard about it, because all the games on that side weren't necessarily like very cinematic. But it could happen there. That's at least kind of where my working theory is at this point, is that we're going to see the Sealing War between Ganon and these heroes. Which would be Link.
That would make sense to kind of give us an explanation as to how, why, if Ganondorf was successful, then he's now this other being, which then turns into Ganon later. There's definitely a link missing in there, pun intended. Mm-hmm. but yeah, it would make sense. I think it's either going to be at the beginning or the end. I think I still probably lean towards the end, but I mean, now that I hear it, I like thinking about what may have happened in there, because you're right, we haven't really dived into that yet in the series.
Yeah, and the questionable thing too is that for each one of these games, almost it says Ganon is revived.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point between Ocarina of Time and A Link to the Past, Ganondorf is quelled, or Ganon is quelled or defeated. And so we don't know how, and we don't know why, we don't know what happened there. And I'm thinking that this may be the game that we see that in. Of course, there's dozens of other theories out there about this, but that was kind of my 2 cents on where it would be placed in the Downfall timeline. Of course, like you said, there's also the fact that it could unify all the games. So, kind of give me some more information on why you think that.
It's just like, I mean, you see the little bits here and there from every single timeline kind of scattered in, right? You see the little leaf dudes. Why can I never remember what they're called?
The Karoks.
Karoks, yeah. I mean, we've seen them. They're from Wind Waker. You've seen, the Temple of Time from Twilight Princess, Ocarina of Time. You've seen just kind of these different landmarks from all of the different games. And it's a fun theory to think about, right? 'Cause, I mean, the timeline is fairly convoluted, so to bring a sense of unity to that it's definitely exciting to think about. So, I mean, the clues are there. It could easily be that, but it could also just as easily fall into place in the Sealing War or somewhere after that.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it could fall anywhere else in any of the other separations of the timelines? Or does it look like it's either at the end of like to bring it all together, or it's in the Downfall timeline?
Well, I mean that's the thing. Like, if I was going to say anywhere else, I would maybe say at the very end of the Hero's Successful timeline in the Child era. If only because of all the landmarks we've seen from Ocarina and from Twilight. But it could. That's what's exciting about the game. It could be anything. Could be the unification. Could be just a random other story. So, but I think what we've seen so far, this game is definitely going to have big implications for the Zelda timeline and Zelda lore.
And like I think Anuma said it, that once you play the game, you'll figure out where it is in the timeline. Like, this isn't going to be a mystery. Which is surprising, again, because Zelda has never been, or Nintendo has never been focused on story so much as gameplay. But they know that this is what Zelda fans want. The core Zelda fans, not necessarily all of the Zelda fans. And so we're going to figure it out at some point where it fits in the timeline. But yeah, I think those two that we've talked about are the most viable, at least in my opinion.
For what we have for evidence right now, it looks the most likely, right? And kind of piggybacking off what you were saying, but I think like even the kind of renaissance with the Zelda series and focusing on stories even started with Skyward Sword. Wasn't the most beloved Zelda title by any means, but like the storytelling, if nothing else, was pretty top notch, and there were some great scenes in there. So I think that they're getting it, and I think that the next couple core Zelda games will definitely have that flair to it.
Okay. So, next topic then. I kind of want to... I mentioned Windblight Ganon, being a huge monster, no face, and a gun-like arm, being the boss of one of the dungeons. And so, there's a few implications that this brings up, at least in my mind. First, we originally thought that if there are 4 dungeons, if there are only 4 dungeons, that each of the 4 dungeons would only have the bosses would be some form of the corrupted divine beasts. That would make sense in terms of, since there's Sheikah technology, and the Sheikah technology was influenced by Ganon at some point. Right. Would those be the bosses of the different dungeons? But obviously, or from what we could tell, Windblight Ganon is something completely different. Unless, and here's where one of the things that I've been thinking about is kind of like what we were talking about, is Ganon is more of an energy at this point. So maybe that is the divine beast, and maybe Ganon, Windblight Ganon, is possessing it.
I was gonna say, like, I wouldn't put it past, them being corrupted in some sense and turning into these, calamity Ganon forms themselves. And once you beat them, you freed them and kind of rescued that little sector. That still makes sense to me.
Yeah. And the name is still confusing. Like, a lot of people have been really confused by it, because it, doesn't really make sense, especially with what we can see from the boss itself. It doesn't look like it's part of the wind at any point. It looks like a giant mechanical beast with a gun arm. Like, they're trying to show us that they still remember Metroid, but not really.
Bring up Metroid.
So,
wouldn't
what
it
do
be
you...
cool, though, if the other bosses were like Twilight Ganon or like Majora Ganon or something like that?
Ooh.
Never happened, but that'd be cool.
Well, that is interesting that you bring that up, though, because if this is completely out there, and this is probably not true, but, the wind is part of the Wind Waker. That was literally in the name. And the word blight is like a disease. It means a disease, or an infection. So what if that's a version of Ganon from the Wind Waker timeline? And then what if we fight a boss that's the Ganon from the Child timeline, from, like you said, the Twilight Ganon? And then what if we see one from, like, A Link to the Past or one of the other games, like, being that kind of Ganon? What if the name Windblight Ganon means this is the Ganondorf, or the version of him, or the piece of him that was in Wind Waker? Because also, if you notice, they never refer to Ganon in Wind Waker as Ganondorf. He's always Ganon, which was an interesting stylistic choice, which may have other implications. But what do you think about that thing that I just...
First and foremost, if they're going that road and you're battling a Ganon from Wind Waker, from Ocarina, from whatever, I think that lends like serious credibility to this timeline, merging everything together. Would be my initial first thought. The second thought would be like, that would be off the rails. Like, fighting all the different versions of Ganon would just be amazing. Like, total fan service, but just like a total like wicked present to timeline enthusiasts that have been, obsessing over the timeline for as long as it's been around. I would like love to see that. That would be really cool. Yeah. I don't necessarily think that'll happen. I think that the theory of the corrupted guardians is probably more likely, but that would be something.
Yeah, that'd be really cool.
That would be sweet.
If they did that, then they'd totally blow my mind with it. But like you said, that's not as likely to happen as them just being corrupted guardians, sadly. So don't get hyped up for what we just came up with.
Yeah, we're sorry to raise your expectations up, everyone.
Yeah, that's probably not going to happen. But kind of with that topic then, do you have anything else left to say on that one?
No, other than I'd just like make it happen. That would be awesome. That would be so cool.
Okay. So we're gonna talk a little bit about some other theories, and this is also going to include the analysis and some of the hypothesizing from the Commonwealth Realm character analysis. And this next one is what I mentioned earlier with HMK and Zelda Masters Theory. It talks about this game being the end of the cycle. Of course, they in the video you'll hear that they are proposing a fourth timeline split, which comes right after Skyward Sword, which we know is not the case here. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this can't still work. So the points that they made, where they said that this game could have the end of the Curse of Demise, and the only way to do that would be destroying the Master Sword, because as we saw in Skyward Sword, the remnants of him were in the Master Sword, and it had to be sealed away in order for the power of the evil to be stopped. And Fi was supposed to stay behind and purge the evil. But from what we can tell, every time the Master Sword is pulled, things only get worse before they get better. So like Ganon has more control over Hyrule in Ocarina of Time, and in Wind Waker things kind of get worse in that area of Old Hyrule. So the theory that they're proposing is that the Master Sword is the reason why things keep happening over and over and over again, and that the decaying Master Sword is something that the story is going to be about, with them trying to destroy it, removing the remnants of Demise purposefully and permanently from the world. So that was an interesting theory. I never thought about that.
What about this to add on to this theory? And cut me off if I haven't read this theory yet, so I'm just proposing this in not knowing if they already did or not. But if you destroy the Master Sword, let's say, and you're fighting a corrupted version of Faye who maybe is responsible for Calamity Ganon, that would be kind of cool too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to see, because we've never seen the Master Sword like this before, and it's more than just rusty. It's broken down, it's decaying, and it's more than just a broken version or a powered down version, because as we saw in even Skyward Sword, when we were forming the Master Sword, it was still a viable weapon. In Wind Waker, when it was powered down and you had to unlock its power with the two different sages, it was also still a viable weapon. You could still use it. In this one, it looks like if you tried to swing it and hit someone, it would break. Now, one of the things to note also is that in the trailer and some of the footage that was dropped today, we saw a fully restored looking Master Sword. Whether that took place in the present or the past, however, we're not entirely sure. Another
little tidbit of information too is Nintendo said in an interview, which is on Zelda Informer, I believe, that there was no single weapon in the game that was completely impervious to breaking. So if anything was going to be completely, indestructible, you'd figure it'd be the Master Sword. But maybe they're just throwing smoke in our eyes, but maybe not.
Yeah, maybe, like they said, maybe this is the end of all the Zelda tropes that we know, we've gotten to know over time. And for those of you that are worried about this theory and don't like it, keep in mind that we've had plenty of games. I said plenty. There are a few games that we've seen that don't have Ganon or the Master Sword as the main villain and the main weapon. We've got Four Swords, we've got Phantom Hourglass, we've got Spirit Tracks.
You got Majora's Mask, which was voted the greatest Zelda game on Zelda Informer this last year, right?
Exactly.
So if Ganon and that goes, I have every bit of confidence that they'll find something to replace it with, and who's to say that they can't make another game before that happens anyways. So
yeah. And also, what would be interesting to see, and a character that a lot of people, for some reason, the fan base loves so much, is Vaati. Maybe he returns in later games. Maybe we see him more as, instead of just his handheld title, since they're combining the systems, and it's just more of a hybrid now. What if we see more of him? He's an interesting enough character. We don't know a lot about the Wind Tribe that he came from. So there's a lot of mystery there around him.
Even in Zelda games that have featured Ganondorf, there's been enough strong secondary villains that could carry a game. I mean, you look at Zant, some of the other guys too, that you could easily base a game off of their evil deeds too. So it might be an opportunity to build up some extra characters. Maybe we'll finally get a new Zelda character in Smash Bros.
So would you like to see this happen then? Would you like to see all of those tropes die off?
Having just said all that, no, I don't think so. There's something about the fight with Ganondorf and the bond between the Triforce that I think is essential to Zelda. I definitely I would like to see something substantial happen with this game though, and I think that it will. What that is, I'm not sure yet, and I think it'll change the Zelda going forward. I don't know that I would want to completely get rid of Demise's curse or Ganondorf or et cetera. I wouldn't be opposed to having more spin-off games, kind of like Majora's Mask or any of those games too, just to highlight some of the other stuff that goes on in these times of lull between when Ganon attacks and when he doesn't. But at the end of the day, I think I'd keep that at least in the series, because that's one of my personal, high points is the bond between those three and how they're linked always. Pun again.
Yeah. And I'd agree to a point, but I'm not opposed to them making a new villain and putting someone new in Ganondorf's place. My best example, I guess, of this is how for a good portion of Metroid, I think for a while, Mother Brain was the big bad in Super Metroid. And there's always been Ridley being like a really big character.
Mm-hmm.
We know that there's history between him and Samus, thanks to Other M, which I think the game, for one of its strong suits, told a good story.
Underrated game.
Yeah, it had its downsides. There were
I
plenty
can see why
of
people
those.
didn't like it, but it's pretty good.
I liked the story in it. It was good as an early Metroid game. But digressing, in the series, the best villain of that game wasn't introduced until way later on, and that was Dark Samus. In my opinion, Dark Samus was the best addition to that game series. And we saw Dark Samus in, aside from Super Metroid, what is probably the best Metroid games, or the best Metroid games of all time. I think a lot of people would agree that the Prime series is amazing. Regardless of if you like motion controls or not. I downloaded the trilogy a while back, and I've been playing it off and on for a while.
I can't play the Prime trilogy without the motion controls. I thought they were great, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Like a total
they are
improvement.
great.
Just looking around was a hassle
Mm-hmm.
on GameCube days. But I agree with Dark Samus. It's definitely not impossible to create a new and compelling villain. 30 years into the history of Zelda.
Yeah,
they could definitely do it, and they've shown us before that even the smaller villains, they can do it.
and the thing is too is with with Zelda becoming more
cat.
story-oriented. With Zelda becoming more story-oriented, we'll see. I'm having such a hard time with words right now. We'll see more opportunities to expand upon more different characters, and you could say that Link and Ganondorf are as iconic as Mario and Bowser, but I disagree. First off, because
definitely not Ganondorf.
Yeah,
You could make that argument about Link, but Ganondorf definitely doesn't exist on their level.
Yeah, no, Bowser is as iconic as any villain could basically be in terms of, I guess, modern pop culture or nerd culture.
Mm-hmm.
Like he and Mario, their struggle isn't really like a serious one. It's not like they're mortal enemies locked in death by a curse throughout time. There's really no story to the series anyway that also lends itself to that. But there's other things that they do. Like people make jokes about it. Brawl in the Family made jokes about them playing carts together after having fought. You wouldn't see that kind of thing with Link and Ganondorf. Them getting along. That being said, again, he's not as iconic as Bowser is in terms of being a well-known villain and a villain that Link can't exist without. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like Mario and Bowser are Tom and Jerry, or the Road Runner and Wile E. Coyote, and that's their dynamic. It's always been the dynamic between them. But Link and Ganondorf, first off, really never had that dynamic to begin with. Like in Legend of Zelda and Adventure of Link, Ganondorf didn't exist. It was Ganon and then Ganon's shadow, or Dark Link.
Mm-hmm. But it doesn't help that Ganondorf's in only really like a handful of games. He's been in Twilight Princess, Wind Waker, Ocarina of Time, and am I missing anything else?
I don't. Was he in?
Because he wasn't in Skyward Sword, which is the other main Zelda series game. He's not in Link to the Past. He's not in the originals. Typically, the handhelds have spin-off villains and stories.
Mm-hmm.
So I would even argue like the second most iconic character in the Zelda series is Zelda rather than Ganondorf.
Yeah, if you didn't have Zelda, then that'd be a problem. Yeah. If there was no Zelda in The Legend of Zelda, then we'd have a bit of a difficult time, especially with the name. But there's many different reasons they've talked about why the game's called that. I don't think it'd be too affected like with spin-off titles if Zelda wasn't in the game, because it's still a legend that happens within that contained universe. But like you said, Zelda would be the second most iconic character out of that series. Ganondorf being the last, I guess. So, yeah, I had to check. Even in Four Swords Adventures, it was Ganon.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there's not a lot of... It's not necessarily known... widely known. In the fan base, it's known for its villains. Ganondorf is a good, compelling villain. He's a good foil to Link. But he's not as, noticeable or as... what's the word I'm looking for?
His presence is felt in the games that he's in, but really, like we just said that there's 3 games that Ganondorf appears in, and I'm looking at 2 of them, Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, and I mean, really, it doesn't even show up until halfway through those games. So you just don't have the same amount of exposure that like a Bowser does. So that replacing him would be easier. I still personally hope it doesn't happen. I like that his presence is kind of is felt, but I wouldn't be opposed to a new villain too. I mean, Majora's Mask was one of the coolest villains I think that Nintendo's ever done.
Yeah, and even you mentioned Twilight Princess. It wasn't even mostly... It was like maybe 3/4 of the way through when you saw Ganondorf. And Zant was a compelling villain in and of himself. We really didn't need Ganondorf in that game. And that was a lot of people's complaints, actually, with Twilight Princess, was how they kind of shoehorned Ganondorf into the game for the game's story. So, I know a lot of people are going to disagree, but I'd be okay if they added a new villain or brought one back in the form of Vadi or something, where we didn't always have to have Ganon or Ganondorf being the main villain of the game.
Mm-hmm.
I'm one of the guys that
thinks Vadi's a really cool villain, and that piece of fan art, the mock fan art of him in the Breath of the Wild style artwork was really cool. I'd love to see him in a 3D game.
Oh yeah. Okay. So moving on then. This is a problem that we had last week in terms of the Rito being named in Breath of the Wild as the birds. And there's I didn't look for this, but I found it was a Zelda theory on the Rito. It's done by the gamer musician, and so I'm going to break down a few of the facts that he presents and kind of give us. There's really not a definitive fact that's like, aha, this definitely isn't it. It's a theory, as most of these are, or as all of these are. None of them are facts, except for the fact that they said it comes after Ocarina of Time. But so he says in the video that the Rito, the word, is its etymology is based on the Japanese word tori for bird, and Rito is just the word orders flipped, or the letter orders are flipped. I always forget what that's called. But instead of it being Tori, it's Rito. Also, though, Rito is the Italian and Spanish word for rite, as in a rite of passage. And we know that the Rito gained their wings from a rite of passage by going into the cave and seeking Valu, and him bestowing upon him the gift of flight. In the thing that lends this to... in terms of the Zora and this version of the Rito in Wind Waker not being able to coexist, is that in the post-Great Sea world, there were no Zora, and that the Rito were the physical replacement of the Zora. And so for his discussion, he names 2 different types of Rito in terms of where they take place in the timeline. So they're the Flood Rito, which are in Wind Waker, and they're avian humanoids. So they're primarily human creatures in terms of form, with some avian features like arms and kind of wings on their arms, but they also have mouths and feet and hands. But the Ruined Rito, which he calls the Rito in Breath of the Wild, they're more humanoid avians. So they're birds with human features. I know this is a little confusing, but they have talons and they have wings as opposed to hands. Even in Wind Waker, while they, Medley had wings or Kamali had wings, they also had hands. Mm-hmm. And even in I think Cass is the name of the bird that we saw playing the accordion or something. He was using his wings to play. One of the things that he also mentions to the possibility that these are not the same Rito was we know that in the same timeline, I guess, because Ocarina of Time is in the same timeline as all of these, that there were two different races of Zora. So you have the River Zora and then the Lake Zora, which are the civilized ones.
Right.
And so these could be two different types of Rito, and they're not the same exact Rito that we've seen before. Which wouldn't be shocking because we've seen two different species or two different types of the same species before. So that I like that theory because that cleared up a lot of stuff that I had a problem with them being the name the Rito. But what do you think about that?
I like the theory too. It doesn't necessarily answer the question or like the mystery of why both the Rito and the Zora are in, because that seems to be a paradox that they can both exist in that world. So if anything, I think that would probably give more substance to the unifying the timeline theory. Mm-hmm. I do like the theory though that I hadn't really thought of that either, but that there were two different types of Zoras, that there could be two different types of Ritos as well. When I first saw them, I was just picturing them as a complete new species actually, because they looked similar, but they had enough differences. So, but now I'm curious to see where it goes, but I don't know if that would quite do it for me in answering the question of how are these two races, both here.
Mm-hmm. And kind of going off of that then, since these are kind of the same in terms of, character discussion, we'll go ahead and just talk about the Commonwealth Realms one bit by bit, but they also talked about the birds that we're referring to that have been named the Rito, that they look kind of like, the only other birds we've seen in the series are the Loftwings. And so their theory was that these birds are descendants of the Loftwings. What are your thoughts on that one?
Well, when I first saw them, I thought they looked like Loftwings too. That was my immediate response. And I think the first trailer we saw with the Rito or the Bird People was at the Game Awards. And when I was watching that, I was like, oh, Skyward Sword Loftwings have evolved. So mm-hmm. If anything, I think that would have been a better explanation for me, is that maybe the Loftwings have evolved and become a race in their own right. It's nice to see the tie-in there, so it's interesting to see if they'll go forward with that or not. Yeah,
and like you said, that this also lends itself to there being a more unification of the timelines. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people chalked up this game to being right after, on the child or the adult timeline because of the Karoks and the Rito. And it wouldn't make sense, thematically, for them to introduce a new species into the game based off of an old species, especially if this was to take place at the end of all the timelines. So we've never seen the Loftwings except for in Skyward Sword, and now all of a sudden we're seeing them again, evolved. Kind of doesn't make sense. But of course, this all relies on timeline placement and in terms of that idea, and so it's all a little confusing. We don't really know when this game takes place, except in one of the three timelines or in all of them.
Mm-hmm. Definitely confusing for sure.
Mm-hmm. He also goes on to say that one of the things that I thought was interesting was that the Karoks aren't an evolution of the Kokiri children, and that the Kokiri are more of a spirit. Like, they're spirits that take on the form of whatever suits their survival. Mm. So in the Flood world, or the Flood timeline, they took on the form that they did for their protection and for their survival. And so, kind of reason this out. As children, they're not really durable, so they're not going to be able to survive very easily against creatures or monsters. But as these solid wooden creatures, they're able to take the form of something that can resist being attacked a few times, maybe. Again, this it's kind of a stretch, but do you think that they're more of an evolution, though?
I personally always consider them an evolution rather than. My biggest I'm gonna poke a hole in that theory point right now is like, if they could take on the form of something that protects them, why wouldn't you take on the form of something aquatic to be in the Wind Waker world? Which is actually ironic too, since like Zoras would have been the best fit for that world, and they're the only ones that apparently got left in the dust by evolution. I like to think of it more of an evolution. I think it makes more sense to me, because if they're just if they're taking on other forms, I'd expect to see like a school of Karok fish or something like that, rather than what they were in Wind Waker.
Mm-hmm. And I see that, like, the whole idea that of the evolution that they posed in these games over and over again is really confusing, because, like you said, the Rito don't really make sense in terms of how that evolution worked. Because the Zora are basically the perfect race. They can survive on land. They can survive in the water.
Who really seems out of place is the Gorons.
Yeah.
If anyone, you think that they wouldn't be kicking around still.
Yeah, on their floating rafts around everywhere.
And somehow Tingle still made it too.
Yep. So maybe it's in the child timeline, because Tingle was in Wind Waker. I don't know. It's all confusing.
I think Tingle's like an interdimensional time traveler that can just go wherever he wants to go. Calamity
just making
Tingle.
maps. That's the real villain of the Zelda series. Some other things to note about this Commonwealth Realm video was that we saw a Gerudo town in the desert. So it was a well-developed town. It had walls. There was Gerudo life. They had water there. And they have some theories on this girl, too, that's accompanying you. All the videos that we're talking about are linked down below. Sorry if you're only listening to this as audio. But I'll have these 4 videos, 4 videos linked below, so you guys will know, where we're getting all this from. Also, in any news that you guys want to know, check on our website too. But overall, basically, the Commonwealth Realm talks about the different species that we see, the different characters that we see. One of the interesting things that they noted too, that I kind of want to talk about a bit, was that there appear to be 2 different types of Sheikah. There's the Hylian serving Sheikah, or loyalists, that are in the shrines, and then there appear to be others, like in the video that Game Explain posted, where Link's fighting one, being kind of a defector, being opposed to Hylia and to the kingdom, and those being 2 separate factions. So what are your thoughts on that one?
That it might make sense in a way. Maybe Ganon has corrupted them. I would definitely need some more context as to where the Sheikah dissolved, because their main charge is to protect the royal family, and that's what they've been doing for generations in every Zelda game that we've seen. So for them to stand against the royal family would be pretty strange in the face of their history, unless maybe Calamity Ganon has infected what's left of the royal family and is issuing orders or something like that, kind of like a Lord of the Rings thing when Theoden got infected. But other than that, I'd definitely need some context to wrap my head around that one.
Yeah, and that's kind of true for pretty much everything in this game. is that we need to see more context and more, basically more
absolutely.
of the story.
Nothing really makes sense now. I'm sure that it will, but from the small pieces that we've got, we're talking about things from one timeline, and then the Crocs from one, the Ritos. We're talking about the Temple of Time from the successful timeline. We're talking about things from every single version of this, and then we're even talking about things that happened way back when in Skyward Sword. So it's just it definitely has the elements of every single game so far. So it's hard to put a point on it. So I'm surprised that Nintendo has said like so definitively like you're going to be able to tell where this one goes in the timeline. So that's it sounds pretty like something pretty bombastic is going to happen.
Mm-hmm. And it's going to be very well explained.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've talked about this before, that this Zelda game is, first off, they're breaking all the conventions with this game, and most of all, in my opinion, the thing that I'm looking forward to the most is the story of the game, because I love stories, I love dissecting
I'm a huge,
story movies.
like RPG fan as well, which are based off their awesome stories. So the last couple games where Zelda's been stepping up its game in terms of the way that it tells its story and the cinematic approach has just been awesome. And this game looks like the culmination of all that.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see where it plays out. Of course, I'm getting it day one, whether or not that's a good financial decision.
I feel ya.
And I'm looking forward to playing the heck out of that game until I pass out from exhaustion. And hopefully, and we'll find out more whenever that comes out. We'll definitely be talking about it a lot on here. So, kind of wrapping it up then. So we talked about all these theories, talked about some of our opinions on them. But based on what we know, and based on seeing videos and seeing people explain and break things down, what are you most excited for Breath of the Wild?
Sorry, you cut out the last part there.
Oh, sorry.
Where am I? What?
Based on what are you most excited about for Breath of the Wild?
Oof, that's a loaded question. Everything, obviously. I mean, this has been like 3 years in the making, but no, I'm excited. If you ask me right now what I'm most excited for, it's the story, to see what is going on, what's up with the blue tunics, why is everybody wearing it, who are all these different people in that trailer, how are the Zoras and the Ritos in the same place, what is Calamity Ganon, and then I'm excited for getting lost in a world where you can literally go anywhere, do anything. I get kind of burned out of playing open world games a lot of the times. A lot of times I think there's just too much to do that doesn't mean a whole lot, but this is taking that concept but giving it to me in my favorite series with my favorite conventions in the series, and updating them, and just being able to learn that and get lost is like I often say, like, when the Day of Zelda game comes out, it's better than Christmas, because Christmas comes once a year, and Zelda comes, like, sporadically over the years, So, I'm just excited for the experience, I guess, would be how I would put it.
Yeah, I'd agree with the story aspect, but one of the things that I'm looking forward to about this game is more kind of like an idea, is that I'm looking forward to seeing how intentional Nintendo's been with this game. Because Nintendo, despite what people say about them and their graphics, they're every detail of their games matters. In like big series games like this.
Well, that's why they take so long to put out, right? If they didn't, you'd have it Assassin's Creed style, or you'd have a Zelda every year.
Yeah. Like, again, I was playing Metroid Prime, and I've been playing 3. And watching everything move, and watching the different pieces of technology interact with each other, and how things, I guess it kind of like in Transformers, the first time you saw a Transformer transform, in the first movie, it was like, wow, that was kind of cool to see that happen, to see how all the pieces like reconfigured and stuff, and a lot of that happens in Metroid Prime, and seeing how things move and seeing how they all fit together in a physical sense, and seeing that kind of intentionality and attention to detail in Breath of the Wild is really exciting, because not only are they paying attention to every detail in the graphics, but based on what we've heard, they're paying every attention to the detail in the gameplay, every attention to detail in the story, and side quests and towns. Like this will be the most detailed game, fleshed out game that I think Nintendo's ever released.
I 100% agree.
Yeah, I'm just looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to see how, like, even the small details, like we were talking about with the grass. Like I went back and played Wind Waker HD today, just to like put it in perspective, and seeing the flat texture of green with like patches of grass just kind of seemed off to me after having seen and played parts of Breath of the Wild where grass was everywhere and it was like an actual thing. It wasn't just like patches here and there.
I wrote a story last week that Nintendo hired an animal like expert to make sure that the horse hoof sounds were on point. Like that doesn't tell you everything you need to know.
Yeah, it's that kind of detail that gets me excited for this kind of stuff, because, and it's as much as we've been waiting for this game to come out forever, I'd rather wait for a finished, polished game where every detail matters than a rushed game with features missing, or the game just feeling empty.
Absolutely.
And I think at the end of the day, everyone else would agree with that. Is, as much as it sucked to wait for this game for so long, it's going to be well worth it when it comes out, and we're going to see how Nintendo has poured their entire, soul into this game.
Mm-hmm. Well, one other thing that I'm really excited for with this game is I'm a big fan and study, I guess, of Nintendo and their history in gaming, and Zelda series in particular, and their impact on not only the game industry but like the history of the medium as it goes forward. So I've wrote a couple times now saying that I think that this game is the most important game that Nintendo has ever done, like bar none. So one thing I'm looking forward to is not the immediate aftermath of Breath of the Wild, but like slowly watching the results of that game come in and seeing how this game shaped the launch of the Switch, which then shapes Nintendo's future in making hardware, which then kind of spirals and has that effect onto everything else that we know and love about Nintendo and the Zelda series in particular. So I'm quite excited to see that as well.
Yeah, I agree. Like it's going to be interesting because when Nintendo puts out something like this, they revolutionize how other people make games. So Ocarina of Time revolutionized games in terms of how they were made, how they were played, what they looked like, what they did.
Absolutely.
That's set as an industry gold standard for that game.
And a lot of people really take for granted a lot of the things that Ocarina of Time did. Before that game came out, there was no lock-on mechanisms, there was no context-sensitive buttons. Like a lot of stuff that was in that game just became industry standards like that, like overnight.
Yeah. And so Nintendo's taking on a brand new area for them. They've never done a truly open world game like this. And I'm interested to see their take on this genre, because they're going to add their own twist to it. They're going to add their own nuances to it. That's going to be something different than what we've seen before. And like you said, I want to see how that affects other games going forward, whether that's other Nintendo games or other, Sony, Microsoft, third-party games going forward. Because in a lot of games, a lot of third-person or first-person adventure games or open-world games, you can see Zelda's influence in those games. You could see some more directly, like an Oceanhorn, which is like kind of a parody, not like a joke parody, but kind of a parody off of Wind Waker. But you see them set these standards, and you see the industry try to match with them. Because at the end of the day, not everyone's going to enjoy Uncharted, or not everyone's going to enjoy The Witcher. But at the end of the day, almost everyone can pick up a Nintendo game and play it and be content with it. That's one of the things that Nintendo's always had up on the competition, is that they're very accessible to other people. And I'd like to, again, like you said, I'd like to see how they radicalize what they're doing. I think it's going to be interesting.
I definitely can't wait to see. No secret that Nintendo was in worse shape after the Wii U's life cycle than the Wii's life cycle. So this game is going to be extremely important for them to get back on track. So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing the impact of this game.
Yeah, definitely. So any closing thoughts on anything we've talked about today?
How many days is left? Like 24?
Yeah, something like that.
24? My only closing thought is this, listeners. Should I go to the midnight release and pick up Zelda, or should I wait until the morning and be fresh so I can play all day? That's my only thoughts.
That's a Friday. It's a Thursday night and a Friday.
It's a Thursday night and a Friday, yep.
So, let's see. I won't have a Greek quiz that week, so I think I'm skipping that day of Greek and just playing it all the way through. Not all the way through, but just playing the day away with that game.
Mm-hmm. I have 5 days booked solid just to play Breath of the Wild. Took it off from everything.
I don't see why not to go for it. Just go to a midnight release. I'm probably going to do that. Pick up Switch, pick up the game.
Yeah.
I mean, if you guys want to buy it on Wii U, that's fine. No problem there. But if you've ever played a Zelda game, B, if you've ever played a Zelda game but you've fallen away from the series, or if you've played the game and you're still a fan of the series, you need to get this game. So, basically, if you've ever heard of Zelda, you need to get this game. And if you're a fan of open world games, all the better. Because this game is going to be amazing based on everything that we've heard. I hope so, because the expectations for Breath of the Wild are extremely high.
Be higher.
Exactly. So this game needs to set the world on fire. Otherwise, we might see some trouble. But I have no doubt in my mind that this game is going to be amazing. From the short demo I've played to all the stuff that we've seen, I'm super pumped.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What more can you say? Hurry up, March 3rd.
Exactly. I mean, just sleep until March 3rd, you know?
Alfred, open your eyes.
Wake up. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Andy, for joining us this week.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. We'll see you guys next week. And like I said, make sure to leave any feedback you have about this week. Obviously, this isn't going to become the standard for every podcast, but this is just something fun that I wanted to talk about. Just a bunch of theories about the game. So we'll see you guys next week, and have a great weekend. This will come out on Friday.
See ya.
Bye.